a lot of large crowds in my life, but I've never been in one that didn't either have an edge of anger or a lot of drunkenness or kind of performance. This was all unity, all love, and what people were celebrating was this milestone, which was sweet and exciting and important. But they were also celebrating, you could kind of cut the relief in people's feelings with a knife. I mean, it was the sense that we were going to leave behind the era of 9/11, an era of fear and war without end and repression and constitutional shredding and scapegoating of gay and lesbian people, on and on. And there we were, millions in the park representing everybody, hugging, dancing, carrying on, right in the spot 40 years ago where many of us were beaten and dragged to jail. It was an extraordinary feeling. I don't think at this moment we should be getting into it all, the business of trying to read the mind of the president-elect and see where we, might do this or that. The question is, as Bernardine's saying, how do we build a movement on the ground that demands peace, that demands justice? This is always the question. It's happening, the question is being raised in a new context. So how do, I often thinking historically, Lyndon Johnson wasn't a civil rights movement, but he was an effective politician who passed civil rights legislation. FDR wasn't a labor leader. Lincoln didn't belong to an abolitionist party. They all responded to something going on the ground. And in a lot of ways, we have to get beyond, progressive people have to get beyond the idea that we're waiting for a savior. We're not waiting for a savior. We need to transform ourselves, transform our movements, reach out to one another, and build an irresistible social force for change.
I want to add one word about the election last week, because I'm not done with savoring it and being struck by the uniqueness of the moment. One of the things, I've been using the word jubilant to describe the feeling in Grant Park and in Harlem and in Soweto and in Indonesia and in, India. It was a global celebration of an election. And it was somber at the same time that it was ecstatic. I think people felt that way when they were home with their kids or taking care of their elderly parents, or whether they wanted to go out to some public place and just be part of the phenomena. And it does represent two important things, at least. One of them, it seems to me, is a pretty decisive rejection of the politics of fear, whether it's fear that there's some secret cell of domestic terrorists from the 60s hanging around, or fear that our major primary approach to the world and to raising our children should be one of fear. Obviously, life includes tragedy and pain and suffering, and that will come along. But approaching the world as 5% of the world's people now seems possible, adjusting how the United States thinks of itself in the world. That's, to me, an enormous thing. Secondly, you want to recognize here that the famous and much talked about Bradley effect, the notion that white people cannot leave behind some of the trappings of white supremacy and racism that have been the ugly river beneath all U.S. discourse, is really important. I was struck when you were playing those tapes that the real coded message underneath those tapes that used Bill as a fear proxy is that you don't know who Barack Obama really is. There was some notion of him being unknowable, exotic, strange, foreign, deceitful. And, strangely enough, we feel like if all they could come up with was that he knew us casually, the guy's pretty clean. It's pretty extraordinary. He's been vetted and vetted and vetted, and there was nothing there to throw at him except this question of maybe an African-American man is not knowable to white people. And it's worth, neither Bill or I think that we're in a post-racial world, but it is worth noting that that was rejected by almost all sectors of the population, including independent voters.
I think the attack on
Bill, if I can, I'd like to change tack for a moment and talk a little bit about how you evolved from the period of Weatherman. Obviously, you were fugitives for a while, then you came above ground and settled your problems with the law. You became a professor of education at the University of Illinois at Chicago and a leader of the reform movement in education in that city. This whole issue of public education and what you see as what needs to be done in public education to revamp our public school system and what you would hope an Obama presidency would address.